1 hour down, 3 to go. Stiles Watkins, Sactown Sports, featuring DJ Bedhead, a.k.a. Nate Littlefield.
What I'm thinking, Sacramento.
Thank you, DJ Bedhead. And now it is time, and we try to do a good job of monitoring clickbait, not giving clickbait time, but at the same time, if something makes sense or if something is worth looking into, making sure that we give the good people, our listeners, that information. And Kevin O'Connor is somebody who, let's be honest, he's continued to kind of rise up the ranks. He's with Yahoo now, and people seem to care about what he has to say. And, he's a guy who says he studies the game. So when he says something about Sacramento, because of his kind of checkered past with Sacramento, it's hard to take off the purple lenses and hear what he has to say. But we're going to attempt.
Brother De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah. We're going to attempt to do that here, Chris. I'm going to turn it over to you and just take us through the whole thing.
Okay. I will say it kind of comes in multiple parts here. He wrote an article and then also did a podcast version of the article, essentially. So took what he wrote in his article and kind of highlighted, I don't know how many it was. It was about an hour-long podcast. So it was probably I think he has 36. I don't know if these are predictions, what he calls these bold takes. He calls them predictions, one bold take for each team. So he takes some of those, I would say probably 15 of those, and then does a podcast with somebody that we also might be having a conversation with, somebody that kind of popped on both of our radars because of this podcast he did with Kevin O'Connor, one Legend of Winning, which, I think you said it perfectly yesterday during the roundtable. I believe Legend of Winning is somebody who plays NBA 2K with Draper's son.
Yes.
That is my understanding of the extent of Legend of Winning's basketball knowledge, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Let's first talk about the article side of things, where, again, Kevin O'Connor, 36 bold takes for every NBA team. He has obviously one for each team, and then I guess just a couple where he doubled down on a couple teams. His 16th bold prediction or take of the season will be headlined, De'Aaron Fox will become a trade target. Now, already, I think a lot of people's ears perk up, and I will say I will give Kevin O'Connor, that is the benefit of the doubt of, not even benefit of the doubt, but he does go in here to say, I'm not saying the Kings are going to actively shop De'Aaron Fox. It's just that he is saying essentially that the Kings are going to be in a position to where there's going to be suitors for De'Aaron Fox, and they will essentially have to make that decision themselves if they want to trade for him or not. And I think the reason why we can talk about it so much here is because it definitely ties in to the bigger conversation that we've been having all week. It feels like it started last week with De'Aaron Fox, with Shams resurfacing the report that De'Aaron Fox is not going to extend this offseason in Sacramento. This is what Kevin O'Connor writes. If De'Aaron becomes Supermax eligible, are we sure he's actually worth it? They've been average forever with him as the team's point guard, and he's been painfully inconsistent at times. The Kings also just drafted another point guard in Devin Carter and added a veteran in DeMar DeRozan. This is not to say the Kings shouldn't want Fox, but what if he could be flipped for another player, high caliber player at a different position? Or what if he could bring back multiple high value firsts, and those assets could be flipped into something to maximize this window? Point guard is the deepest position in the NBA. There aren't many teams that need one, but I'd imagine at least 6 teams would be interested in Fox, including Heat, Lakers, Magic, Nets, Spurs, and Wizards. If the Kings are merely in the play-in conversation by February, then I expect we'll get a notification on our phone saying that teams are making calls about Fox. That doesn't mean the Kings would have to make a move, but it would mean they're beginning to listen. So there you go. That is the groundwork of which we will be discussing. Again, Kevin O'Connor in his 36 bold takes for the season says, headline, De'Aaron Fox will become a trade target. We'll get into Kevin's thoughts in a second here, but Alan, first, want to get your thoughts on the surface report of Kevin O'Connor saying essentially De'Aaron Fox is essentially going to be a trade target because the Kings aren't going to be successful enough this year.
Yeah, well, that part of it, as far as why he would become a trade target, honestly didn't make me as upset as I thought it would because it does make a bit of sense if they're in that position, if they're fighting.
Yeah.
And we've seen it. We've seen the Kings anywhere from projected to be a 10 seed to a 4 seed. The problem is that kind of just fits with what Kevin O'Connor has continued to say about this team. And he's going to continue to say it. To be fair, Chris, he's going to continue to say it until the Kings prove him wrong. Not that they're playing to prove Kevin O'Connor wrong, but he can continue to say these things when they're losing in the play-in and things like that. So it's all connected to how he ultimately feels about the team. Let's go in this direction. If the Kings are floating around the play-in at that time, it just hasn't really worked out, would they think about it? I mean, I think that they would have to. I don't know what that says to DeMar DeRozan. I think that's a terrible act of faith to DeMar DeRozan, who is one of the, I know it wasn't technically free agency, but one of the biggest pieces that you've got in Sacramento in a very long time. So, I mean, he's had conversations with De'Aaron Fox. Obviously, he didn't sign DeMar DeRozan didn't sign a 1-year deal, right? So for them to give up on this thing the first year, I know it's not the first year with this core, but it would be the first year with DeMar DeRozan. I think the Kings and Sacramento can't really afford to make a move like that. It would just not look good for the organization. But if I didn't have any connection to Sacramento and I'm looking at it, and he says you don't have to make the move, could they be in that position to where they at least listen to calls? Sure. I think there are crazier situations out there. So I'll at least say that it's somewhat realistic. I just don't think the Kings will be in that play-in situation.
Let's hear what Kevin O'Connor has to say. Let's let him explain himself a little bit. Here's him kind of laying out his defense for his take.
The team that people seem split on is the Sacramento Kings. They add DeMar DeRozan, who I love DeRozan. I think DeRozan is still one of the better bucket getters in the entire NBA. But De'Aaron Fox, last week, he was talking about not signing his extension. And he said, if we were contending for a championship, he wants to wait to see if they contend like Tatum did. He wants to see where we're at, he said. Look, it's not in his best interest to sign right now. It would make sense to wait. But I think there could be something there. And that if the Kings are in the play-in conversation again, by midseason, De'Aaron Fox is going to become a trade target. That's my prediction for the Kings this year, that we're talking about. Are the Spurs going to go after De'Aaron Fox? Are the Magic going to go out and try to get De'Aaron Fox? Are the Heat going to try to go out and get De'Aaron Fox? I think that'll be a conversation come February. It doesn't mean a trade will happen, but I think that'll be a thing in February, and it could carry into the offseason.
Well, there you go. There's Kevin trying to explain himself, and I think it is a good explanation. Again, he backs up by saying, not saying the Kings have to make the move, but will those teams be interested or see potentially a wounded gazelle in the pack and say, hey, maybe if we throw a good enough trade package at them, they weren't thinking about trading De'Aaron, but maybe we can at least make them start to think about it. Right. And maybe, who knows, maybe we can adjust their plan. If you just sweep them away with a deal, I'm not super familiar with how many picks San Antonio has stashed. I'm not super familiar with how much Orlando has stashed, but I would think that if the Kings are going to move on from a player like De'Aaron Fox, and I think we mentioned the Mikal Bridges haul, it would have to be something absolutely insane, like 5 first-round picks or 4 first-round picks and a pick swap. I think for the Kings to even consider moving on from De'Aaron, especially like you said before this, year one of the DeRozan experience, it would be just a very, very quick U-turn from where it feels like they were going. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear Kevin. I get that he's just, like you said, he's looking at it not from a Sacramento perspective, but just from an outsider looking in. Is there going to be teams that would be interested if De'Aaron Fox, especially as Karl Anthony Towns gets traded, the list of, hey, who are the good players out there that might be available? I could see how De'Aaron Fox might be a name that you would circle to be on that list, but I think it's fair. I just don't think it's likely to happen, because a big part of it is that the Kings would have to fall on some struggles this season, I think, for that to even be considered.
Yeah, and look, part of the reason the Timberwolves did move off of Karl Anthony Towns is because everybody's afraid of those aprons, the first apron, second apron, and you're trying to keep your costs down. Young talent allows you to keep that cost down, and drafted talent, even though you have that drafted talent with De'Aaron Fox, but drafted talent allows more flexibility. The 916 is saying O'Connor doesn't know much. Obviously, if that had a hint of truth, I believe Monk would have went elsewhere or to resign. But yeah, 916, he's saying this hasn't happened yet. This is more about if things don't go well this season. So everybody feels like things are going to go well this season. That's why Malik Monk came back. So I don't think Malik Monk is necessarily connected to that. What I will say, though, is that I have been continuing, and I know not just me, Chris, but just I cannot be stated enough. This is another reason, whether you agree with it or not, why this season is so paramount for this group from the Sacramento Kings. It's just a huge season, man. It's a what are we, you know what it is, Chris? It is a bit of a what are we doing season, like when you're in a relationship and maybe one of you either wants to take the next step, move in together, get married, have kids, whatever it is. We've been dating for a long time. I know I like you. I know you like me. I might even love you, and I think you love me. But what are we actually doing? Where is this thing going? That's where I think the Kings are at.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I think that they obviously, I mean, the season's huge. I mean, you know, yeah, after the past two seasons, this season is definitely one that's going to define this team, I think, for the years to come. Like, if they don't meet success this year, I think that they're never, ever going to get the benefit of the doubt. And I think if they do have success this year, maybe the narrative does start to flip on, oh man, yeah, like, you know, DeMar's going there, but I don't really think it's going to make any noise. Like, I think that's really when the Kings can start to get into the conversation of things, for sure. But yeah, undoubtedly this season is absolutely massive. And here's Kevin O'Connor explaining, you know, something that he really sounds like one of the texters on the text line or on the Sac chat here, because this is actually something that we've had a couple different people reach out and ask us about. Here's Kevin O'Connor on the De'Aaron Fox conversation maybe being more of a two-way street than we're giving it credit for.
But like, is it possible that the Kings are thinking to themselves as well on their end, is he really a 50, 60 million dollar point guard, or are we better off flipping him for either like some combination of players and picks and trying to shuffle this around DeRozan and Sabonis and Keon Ellis in the backcourt, who's a great defensive player? They drafted Devin Carter, who's going to be a really two-way guard once he gets back on the floor. Is it possible that the Kings could look at Fox as their best asset in order to maximize this roster? Because I think it could go both ways. Like that's kind of my perception here. It's not that Fox alone would be saying, I'm out, like I don't want to be here anymore. But also it could be that the Kings are like, wait a second, maybe we should look around and figure out a way to shuffle the deck here.
So there you go. Again, it's not a new take. We've had a couple different texters and people wonder the same thing. Is De'Aaron Fox even going to be worth the $55-60 million? Alan, you and I think have both said, like, it's just kind of what the market value is. And, you know, there's no way that the Kings are going to offer him $40 million and say, look, we don't think you're a $55 million per year player, especially if De'Aaron goes out there and earns the all NBA or all defensive team. He'll get that Supermax opportunity and he will have earned it. So, you know, I think it's definitely, and I'm not even saying it's not a conversation that the Kings should have. It's not a conversation that they won't have. I just think that it is way too early to start thinking about things like this, but also I just don't think that the Kings would make a move for De'Aaron Fox this season unless it is just a blow your socks off once in a lifetime. There's no way any team would deny a trade like this kind of move. And, you know, I might be proven wrong because this is the same front office that traded Tyrese Halliburton with no warning, but I just feel like with like you said, the importance of this season, I don't necessarily know if you want to throw it away just to try and hope for 3-4 years down the line when DeMar DeRozan might not even be here in Sacramento anymore.
That's cooked.
You have to pretty much sell it. I don't see how you sell De'Aaron Fox and not just have a fire sale after.
Right.
Like, what is, I mean, it almost sounds like Kevin O'Connor there is insinuating that Devin Carter is going to come in this season, if he does come in at all, and look like a starting level point guard that would just straight up replace De'Aaron Fox. And again, I just feel like that's way, way too early to even forget the conversation. It's too early to be having thoughts like that.
Yeah. And as far as whether or not De'Aaron is worth it, Chris, can you confirm something for me?
Okay.
It's just all NBA, right? So Domantas Sabonis was all NBA third team.
I believe
so if
it's
De'Aaron
all NBA,
Fox,
or if he gets defensive, I believe it could also be all defensive.
No, I believe you're correct. I just was making sure it does not have to be first or second. It could be 13.
Oh, it
just
can be
like
any of them. Yes,
okay, so
yes.
but let's just use that example, right? Domantas Sabonis just made all NBA third team, and this team was a 9 seed.
Yeah.
Crazy season. He set records.
Yeah.
But this team was a 9 seed. So put yourself in the position of the Kings.
He's a center, I will say. I don't know if they do positions anymore for all NBA.
Tyrese and Steph and Devin Booker, those were the guards who won NBA all NBA third team. So let's say De'Aaron gets all NBA third team and he's eligible for that.
Yeah.
But to Kevin's point, they're an 8 seed. You know what I mean? And maybe they lose in the first round. You're the Kings, and now you have to pay him this money because he did have a good season, but it did not reflect and turn into a long run. I mean, at least Tyrese Halliburton, I know it was due to injury, but they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. Steph Curry is but even Steph, right? Crazy season. They lose in the play-in. He still made all NBA. So now you're the Kings. You got to pay him $345 million, and you lost in the play-in.
Yeah. No,
you know what I mean? So
absolutely.
that to me that's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
Because the craziest thing is, let's keep it 1,000. It's not a high bar in Sacramento. I mean, I feel like the reason none of this will happen is because you're not asking De'Aaron to go win a finals.
Right.
And we can't pay you this money unless you win a finals.
Right.
You're legitimately, I would say, Chris, you're dang near just asking De'Aaron to get back into the playoffs. And I don't even think they got to win the first round. I think they get to the playoffs, they lose in the first round, and De'Aaron makes all NBA. I think the Kings, based on their history, would have no other thoughts but to feel good about this and pay him that money. The problem is, if they don't make the playoffs and somehow De'Aaron's usage, which we think his usage will actually maybe go down with DeMar DeRozan, but if he sneaks into all defense or all NBA and they didn't get to the playoffs at all, that's the nightmare scenario. But I think if you're the Kings and the lack of star power you've had and success you've had, you're just going to have to eat it. I still don't think you're going to, even if you get a haul, maybe you hit on 2, maybe you hit on more than 2.
Yeah.
When is that going to be? You cook Sabonis because of the age.
Selling that to the fan base.
Right.
Too.
No, you can't.
We're just now getting little, like the smallest taste of what it's like to be back. And then if you trade your best player for 5 future first round picks, to your point, 2030, if we're selling for the rights to Rain Fox, like what are we talking about?
You can't do it.
Yeah. You can't sell that to a fan base, especially one like this Sacramento fan base that has really been through so many thin years and is just getting to the other side of it. It would be such a slap in the face to everybody who bought season tickets and everything like that is finally hoping that this thing is turning around. It would just be massive. And I think that's the part that understandably you're just not going to know from the outside looking in. You could probably think about it. It wouldn't take too much thought, but I think, with how the NBA is especially in the media sense is cycled, I don't think that he's really thinking about something like that, but undeniably, I will give them a little bit of credit on the podcast. They do kind of mention that since it is Sacramento and pretty much lay out exactly what you just said, Sacramento's not really in a position to turn these kind of guys down. Like, you only get these guys every so often. If you're a team like the Sacramento Kings, you're really just going to let him walk because you're afraid to pay that dollar figure. that's just not going to be a good look on anybody. And I don't understand how you could move forward as a serious organization in the eyes of the players across the league if you're trading a guy like De'Aaron Fox. Frankly, after you trade a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, I think they already got a lot of bad PR for that, right or wrong. I think if you trade De'Aaron Fox, people are just going to have no time for you.
916 says would have to be a disaster season for this to hold water. Yeah, there's a part of me that thinks that might even have to be worse than the play-in.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about worse than the play-in, that
right.
probably means there was an injury. So again, okay, well, let's do this again and hope that we don't get injured. So I'm with you, 916. I don't see how it gets there. 925 says when the Warriors traded Monte Ellis, when Steph was unproven, it changed their trajectory. So everything has to be considered. 925. I don't know if we're saying
that is one example.
Devin Carter is the Steph Curry here.
The example, but that is one example.
But I hear you on that, but I don't think that we can have that conversation yet. We know what Steph was coming out of college, and I don't want to tick off any Providence shout out Friar people out there. But yeah, Devin Carter is possible, but that's not even what his
right.
Steph was you have guys that get drafted that are possible stars.
Yes.
And you want to see if they will become a star.
100%.
Devin Carter isn't necessarily that guy. He could be his projection is a really good role player, possibly an elite role player. Catter J on the Sack Chat says, if he's eligible for the Supermax, they don't have to pay him the Supermax. They can pay him less than that and more than anyone else. Will they just pay the Supermax? I think that's kind of what what would you call it, Chris? That's just how the business works. If you get to a Supermax level, because at that point
he would just sign now. I mean, if he wasn't going to sign the Supermax, he would just sign now.
Let's say it happens, and it would be a very Sacramento thing to have that happen. But let's say he's eligible for the Supermax, and they say, "Hey, De'Aaron, we were a playing team. We don't want to strap up the rest of the team. This is what we're offering you." He'd be ticked off, and at that point, couldn't he just go elsewhere?
Maybe not for that dollar figure, because there does reach a point.
He can't get the Supermax anywhere else.
Yes, very close.
But he could say, "Well, I'm
get a ton of money." I mean, and then we can have our favorite tax conversation too, where
go to Florida,
go to Florida, go to Texas, and De'Aaron's from Texas, and he's got ties in Florida with Bam Adebayo being out there. So, and those are a lot of the names that Kevin O'Connor mentioned. San Antonio,
Orlando,
really, really close to De'Aaron's hometown of Cyprus, and. Orlando is close to his buddy Bam, but also not as close as Miami is, where Miami actually is probably the team where I would be most afraid of, because they could actually forget picks. Like if Miami Heat offer Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, I'm just trying to think of the other young, like all of their good young assets. I wonder
who they
if
just drafted, Khalil Ware, throw him in there.
Yeah, exactly. Like I wonder if maybe that could be an enticing package. But again, I think it would have to take a team being all in on getting De'Aaron Fox in their building.
De'Aaron Fox under contract this season. He has turned down the extension. So then next season, we all assume he will take that extension. But if not, he could test out free agency. On the other side, we go around the NBA. The center in Minnesota, not Karl Anthony Towns, gets the bag. And JJ Redick is mad about the basketball. Stiles and Watkins, Sactown Sports.